Most of AI, so-called AI, panic porn as well as shilling, has its origins in the Chinese Communist Party. Let's explore. Hello everyone and welcome once again to the Propaganda Basement, China Daily, bitten by the AI bug. And it's a very fascinating edition of the Global Weekly China Daily to read because it contains most of the types of tropes that we've been able to see throughout 2023 and 2024 with respect to so-called AI, in reality large language models, nothing really too special. But then again, the hype is real, and a lot of that hype came from and still does come from the CCP. Notice the type of graphics, very similar to the Maoist era. That's really something to notice. I mean, the next edition that we'll be reading in the next episode, same thing, this type of graph. Then again, this one also for the next episode. It's a very similar and consistent pattern with Chinese propaganda. Nowadays with more colors, it's a little bit more colorful than back in the times of Mao, but the fundamentals remain the same. And this is mostly because it works. This kind of type of doing propaganda, visual propaganda, just works. It captures the imagination of enough people, so it's worth keeping it around. It's really that simple. And as to why this happens, well, I guess we'll have to ask someone else. There is something to be said about the human psyche, that a significant minority, because once again propaganda doesn't have to persuade the majority, it just has to persuade a significant enough minority. A significant enough minority for some reason is susceptible to this kind of imagery. So, as digital tech lowers entry barrier, entrepreneurship in artificial intelligence field rises among the Chinese youth. A platform powered by artificial intelligence and launched by a 13-year-old quickly went viral among middle school students after making its debut in Shenzhen, Guangdong province last month. The AI button platform, founded by high school pupil Qin Yumo, who entered the 8th grade this year, enables students to customize learning guidance by simply uploading material. ChatGPT inspires new large language model applications. With ChatGPT, a chatbot developed by the United States company OpenAI, taking the world of technology by storm, Chiu used the large language model for the first time to develop her learning platform. All of this is propaganda. This particular fork essentially was never used at scale in China because it was nothing special about it. The point was mostly to emphasize a certain type of use case, and you will notice the pupil is never pictured anywhere, but it's just described as a 13-year-old girl, I presume very much Han, because again it's all about the optics for the CCP when it comes to these things. The point here is to argue for, oh well, look, there are limitations, some of them being copyright limitations. And if you remember, throughout 2023 and 2024, we were all subjected to a lot of, to a barrage of information about how good it is that in Asia, and particularly among the pro-China politicians in Japan and also in China itself, they just suspended or abolished copyright for quote-unquote AI purposes as to foster innovation. And it's very difficult not to conclude that all of the critics, Western critics, to the idea of copyright might have gotten a bit of renminbi or yuan in their accounts, because it's really quite peculiar that just as the CCP was ramping up this particular campaign, suddenly in the West we started hearing about it, about how we should abolish copyright because it chains the AI development, quote unquote. And then suddenly the exact same people forgot about copyright just 6 months later, just as the CCP also suddenly forgot about it, and they just stopped caring and moved on to a different project. And the same is true with other points made about quote-unquote AI, quote-unquote technology. It's almost always some geopolitical angle to it, and the China Daily is very happy to confirm that. Same here, right? Remember women in tech? There you go. The irreplaceable role of women emphasized. President Xi Jinping emphasized on October the 30th the irreplaceable role of women in building China into a strong country and advancing national rejuvenation, saying that efforts must be made to inspire women to contribute their wisdom and strength to Chinese modernization. Maybe they could convince them to have kids? I'm just saying. He made the remark when meeting in Beijing with members of the newly elected leadership of the All China Women's Federation following the 13th National Women's Congress, which concluded on October the 26th. Xi, who is also the General Secretary of the Communist Party of China Central Committee and Chairman of the Central Military Commission, said that the Women's Federation should always work in close collaboration with the party and transform the CPC Central Committee's decisions and plans into specific tasks. So, you can play feminism as much as you want over there, but, this is the orthodoxy drawn up by the Communist Party. Please, little sisters, do not exceed the orthodoxy and the wisdom as delivered from the chairman himself. Okay, we laugh, we joke, but we don't leave the room, as we say sometimes here in Romania. Which, by the way, it's also a saying that derives from the communist era. So yeah. By the way, there's also a slogan that was used. Maybe it will stop being used now that the de-wokification of universities has started to actually happen. The slogan being "Women hold up half the sky," which is a Maoist slogan, and it's still very much fashionable in China. Maybe this should be noted. Being a Western feminist in China is a felony. You go to jail. There's only one way to be a feminist in China, and that is the party-approved way, as I have just read to you. So yeah. As for the AI story, most of it is essentially a very low-key method of sending this message. Please suspend copyright for AI purposes so we, that is China, can somewhat compete, maybe, and by the way, buy some renewables from us, because we could really use the shekelim for it, right? So it's almost always in this key that one should be reading the opinion of this newspaper. Anyway, then there's this one. It's a very nice way of describing how China saw those events. If you remember, in 2023 there was that historical visit from Xi Jinping to San Francisco. Remember when San Francisco was clean? Suddenly the City Hall in San Francisco found a way, miraculously, to clean up the city for the visit of the Chinese president. And of course that happened. The Chinese president definitely wasn't surprised, because that's exactly how it's done in China as well, and generally in communist countries. Whenever the big boss is showing up, everything is cleaned up, tidied up in such a way that the boss doesn't get to see just how much of a shithole the place really is. So anyway, before that visit, this newspaper, in particular China Daily, and we will see in the next episodes, there's a lot of this about the visit of Xi. This newspaper was really busy to print as much opinion as possible, not with the purpose of predicting but with the purpose of influencing decisions and influencing the way Xi Jinping's upcoming visit to the United States with the meeting with the Biden administration is going to be discussed. And that's in fact that is the point of China Daily in general, and perhaps I should have said that in the previous episode, but anyway, I'm saying it now. Most of the predictions made here in this newspaper are not with the purpose of predicting something. They're all with the purpose of influencing the decision within the tiny time bubble that article is being printed, which is why even just 1 year or 2 years later, it's already useful to read it in the propaganda basement, because enough time has passed to be able to compare with what really happened rather than what the wishful thinking of the editorial board of China Daily thought it would, or said it wishes it will. So Washington and Beijing called on to effectively honor consensus as experts eye a positive future. If that sounds familiar, that's because this type of propaganda, well, the experts conclude, and there's an expert consensus. Almost all of that is CCP funded. That's why you saw it a lot during the COVID pandemic project. It was the same thing. Oh, you know, the experts. Do you know better than the experts? Actually, I do, because the experts is usually a panel of people bought and paid for by the CCP. So, you know, when you hear the experts conclude, you should be looking for ideograms, because it's almost always some sort of Chinese op. Revisiting and effectively honoring the consensus reached at the China-US president's meeting in Bali, Indonesia last year is a much-needed step toward making possible another face-to-face meeting of the two leaders in San Francisco this month, officials and experts said. Their comments came as Foreign Minister Wang Yi concluded his whirlwind visit to the US from October 26 through October 29. Wang had a packed schedule, meeting with US President Joe Biden, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, and Secretary of State Antony Blinken. Both sides agreed to work together towards realizing the San Francisco head of state meeting, according to a Foreign Ministry news release following talks. During a symposium with U.S. strategic policy watchers on October the 28th, Wang said the road to San Francisco will not be a smooth one and cannot rely on the autopilot mode. For this reason, the two sides should effectively return to what was achieved in Bali, put the consensus of the two heads of state into practice, remove interference, and overcome obstacles. The two largest economies in the world have seen tensions simmering this year over topics such as the Taiwan question and the Washington sanctions targeting China's semiconductor sector. Wang's trip came following visits to China in recent months by senior U.S. officials such as Blinken and Gina Raimondo, as well as bipartisan delegation of U.S. lawmakers. Speaking with Biden on October 27, Wang said China attaches importance to the U.S. hope for stabilizing and improving relations with China. The One China principle and the three China-U.S. joint communiques are the most important political foundation for the bilateral ties. Wang said the biggest challenge is Taiwan independence, which must be resolutely opposed by taking concrete policies and actions. Biden elaborated on his position, valuing ties with China, saying that the U.S. is willing to maintain communication with China and jointly address global challenges. Now, you will notice that I'm already halfway into the article, and it basically doesn't say anything, right? And that is the key through which, or the lens through which, one should be reading these kinds of things. If it had something important to say, they would have said it by now. So I'm somewhere here, almost halfway through it. If it doesn't say anything, then that means the meeting between the foreign minister of China and top U.S. officials at the time was mostly about, okay, fine, we'll have Xi Jinping in San Francisco. And that's it. Everything else was not going well. And now we know, hindsight is 2020, we know that was exactly the case. But at the time, only the people who knew which lens to apply to read China Daily would understand this. Because if you remember, at the time, this particular visit by China's foreign minister into the United States wasn't even widely reported on. Xi Jinping's visit was, of course, but this one wasn't widely reported on. And perhaps one of the reasons being that the Western part just didn't think it was important, and now we know that it was the case. It simply wasn't important. Anyway, while Wong's meeting with Biden lasted for about an hour, more than double what was planned, Wong and Blinken met for more than 7 hours over 2 days and held comprehensive and in-depth discussions. China and the US are two major countries. We have disagreements, we have differences. At the same time, we also share important common interests and we face challenges that we need to respond to together, Wong said before meeting Blinken. During the talks, Wong noted that the common interests of China and the US are greater than their differences and contradictions. Su Qianhui, the deputy director of China Institute of International Studies Department of American Studies, said that staying true to the reached consensus is a prerequisite for enabling the next presidential meeting and keeping the relations from spiraling out of control. Now, the reason the CCP Times, this China Daily, is framing things this way is because at the time, and this is still true today as I'm taping this, and it will still be true for sure within the Trump administration when this video will be published, there is a much bigger fear on the Chinese side about things going pretty damn wrong than it is on the American side. And this is something that, of course, the Chinese shills in the West don't want you to know, because once you realize that, then a lot of their messaging becomes ineffective, of course. Because the point of Chinese propaganda is to either not know that it comes from China or it comes from a seemingly strong position. But once you know that there is a fear within the Chinese leadership that things can go wrong, and that is to say wrong for China, then suddenly you will realize that there is a much bigger fear on their side than on the American side. And once you realize that, then you're much less likely to be susceptible to CCP messaging. So, yeah. Then, of course, there is this part, right efforts needed to strengthen ties. US experts call for action to find common ground and enhance trust with China. Really? So who are those experts? And then we see the experts. Amy Selico, Principal and Director of National Committee on U.S.-China Relations at Albright Stonebridge Group at the 2023 Annual Conference of the Institute for China-America Studies on October the 17th. See, this is why I appreciate this newspaper. It also contains the propaganda talking point, but then it also says how it reached that talking point. Because, of course, this particular newspaper is not meant, I mean, it is meant for public consumption, but they do bet on the fact that most of the people reading it will just not make the correct connections. And of course they're right, because if more people had made the correct connections, they would either change the format or stop printing it altogether. But, you know, so the US experts, and then it gives us this person, Amy Selico, who nobody knows. I mean, if you ask someone randomly at the Hill, right, or in Washington, generally speaking, who is this person? Do you think anyone would even know to say, oh yeah, he's from the Aldridge for US-China relations? Come on. Seriously? No. That's not how this works, and they know it. The same goes for, let's see, yeah, so basically they quote this particular person multiple times, and then they quote Dennis Simon, former Vice Chancellor of Duke University, who served as Executive Vice Chancellor of Duke Kunshan University in China from 2015 to 2020. He talked about the renewal of U.S.-China Science Technology Cooperation Agreement at the same event. So once again, a very big top-tier expert that I'm pretty sure both the Biden administration and the Trump administration listened to quite a lot. Not. I mean, seriously? So yeah, I mean, if this guy had been so important, then we would have seen him in the Biden administration after his 5-year stint in China. Now, of course, that didn't happen. All he's left with is to give quotes for China Daily, which tells you about just how important this particular expert is. So yeah, again, the point here with these kinds of articles is not to inform you of anything, but rather to try to influence decision making, or if that is not possible, at the very least influence the way the whole thing was being discussed at the time of the writing. So it was trying to convince media reporters and even think tanks, people in think tanks, to say, oh, well, look, there's not an entirely uniform way of looking at things. There are Western experts who say that it's maybe a good idea to be friendlier with China and so on. Yeah, so, there you go. One way of pressuring the British political class. There you go. The Chinese opt for the EU over UK shopping. Britain needs to reinstate tax refund as tourists turning away, say the experts. Now, I'm pretty sure Britain will be fine without the shopping made by the Chinese party-connected people who LARP as tourists. Most of them are actually spies, and everyone knows it. Green pivot needs concrete actions. There you go. More green propaganda because, hey, why not? All good. Gaining a global edge through research. Yeah, I'm sure that works out just fine. Of course, more BRI propaganda. There's quite a lot of it. Almost every edition of this newspaper has BRI shilling for it. So there you go. Nigeria reaps benefits of Belt and Road. There's just one problem. Lekki Port and other China-backed infrastructure projects help West African nation enhance trade and connectivity and improve people's lives. Okay, there's just one problem. When this article was written, the railway that is said here that it's almost done wasn't done, and a year and a half later, when I'm videotaping this, the project is still not done, not over. So almost all of this is smokes and mirrors. Maybe at some point it will be finalized, I don't know. But when it will, the Nigerians should expect to have very similar incidents like it happened in Serbia, with portions of the station falling over people and things like that. But in reality, almost all of this is smokes and mirrors. And that is perhaps the biggest challenge that nowadays Beijing faces, because they've pumped a lot of money, and a lot of that money did not end up working in the interests of the CCP. It did not end up making those infrastructure projects even at a poor quality, and increasingly it's BRICS, quote unquote, and BRI partners are asking, okay, where are the concrete results? And in the past, when this would happen, the CCP would just answer by shoveling in even more money and try to get it done faster so as to shut people up. But these days, that's a problem for the CCP because, well, it has its own problems. It has its own economic crisis. And of course, that is it's in itself a challenge. So that brings in another way of masking that, because of course if you discuss the internal economic challenges of China, then they will come with that article that I mentioned in the previous episode. Well, the collapse of China theory has in itself collapsed. Actually, we're all doing fine. Well, yes and no. If you're all doing fine, why is your demographics so borked? Why do you have so many ghost towns? And also, why are you so desperate to increase trade with Korea and Japan? You can see it's a very similar type of propaganda that Russia sometimes does in Georgia or in Moldova or in Kazakhstan. China, Republic of Korea, and Japan must strengthen business connections despite geopolitics. It's all of this. It's a very similar talking point to the one used by Russia. That is to say, oh, geopolitics doesn't matter that much. Let's make some money. And sometimes this actually works. It doesn't work with Japan or Korea, but with poorer countries, it oftentimes works because, well, you can't afford business guided by values when you're pretty poor. When you're rich, you can afford. And this is a mistake that the West sometimes makes as well, when it requires countries to do values-based trade and international trade, which again works when you're wealthy enough and you can afford it, but when you're not, well, becomes a little bit more complicated. During the past decade, the CJK cooperation dialogue has been playing an important role in promoting trilateral exchanges among China, the Republic of Korea, and Japan. Despite the COVID-19 pandemic and the changes in trilateral relations, the CJK cooperation dialogue continued to be held every year thanks to joint efforts of the three sides. Since 2017, the China Institute for Reform and Development has taken the lead in organizing the annual dialogue. Next year, the CIRD will host the event again and try its best to make a good start to the next decade of the CJK cooperation dialogue. I mean, you'll also notice a very common pattern. Just like with Russia, China loves to have all of these institutes for reform and development, institute, cooperation, dialogue, multiple acronyms, and all of that. And just keeping up with all of these acronyms, like, here, the CPTPP, I mean, there's all sorts of RCEP, the FTA, right? RCEP is the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. The reason for this is precisely the same as in Russia. Bury all of the realistic discussion into so much specified jargon that makes it impossible to keep up. The purpose of these is not to fool Westerners or foreigners, it's for internal consumption most of the time, in order to give or lend credence to the wider point made by the party. Just like in Russia, this is all too complicated. You just mind your own business, do your work for the glorification of the motherland, and we, the elite, will take care of the rest. This is too complicated for you to understand. That is the main reason for this. And you can see some of this being done in the West as well, especially in so-called social studies in academia, right, where they invent all sorts of new jargon and new words to make simple things sound complicated. And then, of course, but unlike China, in the West we can do this thing called voting, and sometimes we vote for the far right to come in over them and force a reform, and then they're basically surprised. I mean, we're supposed to be shielded from this. Well, go to China if you want to be shielded from this. Cooperation. Washington, Beijing can help the developing world better by working together. So this is as digital tech lowers entry, whatever. Yeah, the U.S. partnership key to aiding the global South. Right, it's the same type of thinking. At least this time around, they do quote Jake Sullivan, National Security Advisor at the time, speaking with the Brookings Institute, a respected U.S. think tank. Now, that's true. I mean, at least the Brookings Institute is a respected U.S. think tank. It is a more mainstream thing. This is quite an exception for this newspaper. Generally speaking, they quote all sorts of obscure places. There are examples in which the two countries, US and China, have generated success in recent years. They committed to reduce global emissions. In recent months, multiple high-profile members of the Biden administration have visited Beijing, and each visit has offered hints that talks will continue. And yet, US intransigence continues to undermine an important reality. China and the US working together can do far more than either can do alone. And together they can be especially beneficial for the global South. Make no mistake, the US is playing catch-up. Scientific American, a US science magazine, noted in a report that China invested $546 billion in 2022 alone on clean energy, outpacing all other nations, including the US, which invested $141 billion. The report concluded that China is expected to remain the global leader in this area for at least another decade. We live in a multipolar world. Remember that? Ding, 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 ding. But that idea does not engender positive responses in Washington, where hegemonic attitudes, often wrapped in the mantra of exceptionalism, too often cause irrational thinking and poor decision-making. It is incumbent on the current president of the US and those who follow him in the coming years to set aside the urge to blast China in order to score domestic political points. Instead, recognition of what the two nations can do together by forging a win-win partnership ought to be one of Washington's consistent talking points. The global South and its millions of young adults eager to find their place in the world are watching and listening. Again, note the multipolar world and the global South, because of course You have to put that in there. And millions of young adults eager to find their place in the world are watching and listening. Now, why would that be important for the United States? I mean, at the end of the day, Joe Biden at the time and Donald Trump now are elected to serve the young adults and all adults, all citizens of the United States, not the young adults of the world. The same is true for China, right? But the thing is, and this is a very tough pill to swallow, and it's a tough pill to swallow even for those who otherwise do recognize the harm brought by globalist type of thinking. But even those people somehow have a struggle to figure out that most of the globalist type of thinking does come from China. Why? Because, well, China is a very wide benefactor of globalism, generally speaking. And here, basically, the CCP Times, the China Daily, is trying to threaten. Right? It's a soft threat, but it's still a threat. Do as we say, or else we're going to send you even more young adults. Friendly reminder: there is still, at the time of the filming this anyway, and I doubt it will be solved in a few months. There's still a land route of including Chinese adults who are sent in illegally into the United States. And then, of course, we get to the part that is really interesting for the CCP. Time to rethink arms control. Changing world needs multipolar approach to ensure global stability. So once again, we just want a seat at the table on arms control. Now, of course, all of this is kabuki theater because, of course, China does whatever it wants in its region anyway, and the US isn't even trying too hard to stop it unless it affects Taiwan. Other than that, I mean, the CCP intervened in Myanmar, for instance, or Burma, to help the junta over there, and nobody really bothered to try to stop the CCP from doing that. Now, of course, the rebels were armed by pretty much everyone else, but nevertheless, there wasn't much of a sustained effort to try to stop the CCP from intervening there. What else is the CCP bothered by? Beating the bogus China threat drum. Full of false claims and hyped up theories, Pentagon's latest report on Chinese military fools no one. Oh, really? Well, if it's that false, then why do you bother writing about it? It seems the military-industrial complex and hawkish politicians in the US are intentionally aiming to spoil any diplomatic positivity between China and the US. The Defense Department's recently published 2023 China Military Power Report represents another barb for ties between the two countries. The timing of the release of the report, just days ahead of the Beijing Changshan Forum on Defense and Security Issues, may serve to spread concern among other nations in the Asia-Pacific. Yet the fact remains that the report vividly illustrates the manipulated U.S. Cold War mentality comprising of hegemony and unbridled rise of unilateralism, justifying Washington's military coercion on allies and partners in attempt to contain or even demolish China. It is indeed a collection of the annual China threat theories, in a bid to seek more funds from Congress and deceive regional allies. Now, if this sounds familiar, if this propaganda sounds familiar to you, it's because, well, the people in the West who talk like this, maybe someone should check their bank accounts. It probably coughs in ideograms. Maybe. And the only thing true about this is this part, to seek more funds from Congress. Now, this part is true. There is a lot of truth in it, that the Pentagon hawks sometimes do come and beat the drum harder in the Congress to get more funds. Now, that is true. But everything else is, of course, an exaggeration. But you'll notice that it uses exactly the tropes used by isolationists and other weird and dubious geopolitical commentators in the West, right? The military-industrial complex, the hawkish politicians, intentionally aiming to spoil the diplomatic positivity. I mean, all of these, if you look up these key terms on the blogs and newspapers and publications that LARP as patriotic or isolationist or whatever, sovereignist or whatever they call themselves today, you will notice that all of these tropes are very much present there. And oftentimes they do learn those talking points from CCP operatives. I mean, it just really is that simple. And this part has been missed quite a lot from Western analysis, mostly because over the last 2 years and a half, 3 years, whatever, everyone was focused on Russian influence. And to be fair, that's also understandable. The Russian influence was a bit more interesting, a bit more visible, a bit it seemed more urgent. So in a way I do understand, but by the same token, it is the Chinese after all who have the resources to make things problematic. A bit more than Russia, that's for sure. Anyway, so yeah, all of the multipolar thingy, all of the oh my god, you're hawkish, oh my god, the military industrial complex, all of that, it's just not a surprise at all to see it in CCP Daily, because that's where most of it comes from these days. Now again, that doesn't mean that the CCP is the inventor of those tropes, or no, of course not. But the CCP, just like any Chinese enterprise, is very good at copying stuff and rebroadcasting them. They're just working with the customer's material, as we sometimes say in propaganda. Speaking of which, advancing the green transition through the Belt and Road Initiative, China can contribute a lot to accelerating the global shift to clean energy. Yes, of course. Just like the Belt and Road Initiative in Laos is used to transport wood and coal from Laos to China. Yeah, sure, the trains are electric, but other than that, yeah, it definitely contributes to the green transition, really. But of course, they won't say that here. What they say here is that over the past 10 years, the Belt and Road Initiative has made a sizable contributions to global development, and in the coming years it is poised to become a major force in advancing the global energy transition. With the effects of climate change really starting to hit every continent on Earth, countries around the world should work together to accelerate this transition. Translation: please buy more solar from China, because we can really appreciate the pile of money that you fools in the West are very willing to give to us. Climate crisis at the crossroads. China, India, and the United Arab Emirates must put differences aside to set path to honor the Paris deal, all while China builds one coal power plant per day, every single day, for the last 3 or 4 years, of course. It's not just climate change nor climate crisis, it's simply climate collapse. This is how one of my colleagues at the Intergovernmental Panel of Climate Change described the year 2023. This year is firmly said to be the warmest on record in human history, as per the World Meteorological Organization note on October the 5th. The frequency and intensity of extreme climate events, along with human and economic costs, keep rising every year. A UN report says that over the past 50 years, climate-related events have claimed 2 million lives and cost nearly $3.64 trillion in losses. Now, of course, all of that is a lie. But then again, lies concerning the costs of climate are part and parcel in far-left circles. Now, you will notice that the CCP Times, the CCP Daily, China Daily, is very much happy to just copy-paste the propaganda by the far left in Europe. This is how the far left in Europe talks, which is why they get 4 or 5% in every single election, or even less than that in some countries. Yeah, so the point here, of course, is to just sell more Chinese technology to the West, because every time there is a green party in power somewhere in Europe, they always gobble up a lot of solar panels from China, and thus China provides for them not just the technology itself, but also an ideological cover. Well, it's all for climate. And in Europe, you also see some, I think one of these papers has that too. We'll see. But if it doesn't, I'll just tell it to you. Sometimes they use buying solar from China as a way to lower dependency on Russia. Yeah, let's lower dependency on Russia by increasing dependency on Russia's financer. I mean, seriously? But unfortunately, quite a lot of our fellow countrymen and fellow voters in Europe overall do actually believe that, and they do fall prey to Chinese propaganda. China vital to regional peace. Beijing Tiangshan Forum highlights nations' role in ensuring stability across Asia. Security forums are essential for maintaining global peace, stability, and security because they promote collaboration and communication and produce practical solutions to a variety of security problems. Security forums also influence the shaping of global security environment, and can be used to encourage dialogue and seek peaceful resolutions to disputes or to diffuse tensions. Now, of course, not only this article doesn't say anything other than say, by the way, you should attend our summit, but it also doesn't give any example of how China was vital to regional peace. Now, of course, again, this is not the point. The point is to have this article then sent through various WhatsApp groups and Telegram groups and email newsletters to all sorts of think tank people who will then use it as yet another element of the pile to try to shill for the very basic bitch position, which is let's ask China also. That is really the point of most of this, to introduce China into all sorts of conversations where currently China is not part of. Whether China should be part of such conversations or not is a topic in and of itself. But instead of asking that, the CCP just tries to insert itself more or less by force, because that's how the CCP knows how to do business. High point for Green Revolution. Qinghai's remarkable environmental transformation offers inspiration to foreign delegates. Now, there you go. It was a sight pleasing to his eyes and soothing to his soul. Their yellowish-brown coat with a white underside contrasting with the lush green of the grassland. Indeed, there was a sight to behold against the backdrop of the strikingly blue waters of Qinghai Lake in Qinghai province. Ibrahim al-Hadid, a Syrian national, felt warm and comfortable despite the chilly autumn day, the source of his comfort and warmth being the relatively small, slender antelopes Procapra Przewalski, easily recognizable by the heart-shaped white patch on this rump and more commonly known as Przewalski's gazelle. Procapra Przewalski's is a species of highland antelope native to China and now found only around the Qinghai Lake, China's largest lake in terms of surface area and classified as an alkaline salt lake. Once again, this is a good example, and I think I have another one somewhere here. This is a good example of using environmentalist propaganda to hide something else. In the Qinghai province, quite a lot of people were intentionally starved to death during 2020 and 2021 lockdowns. Having some of this, on Chinese language media, Mandarin media, this was the delegation of some random Syrian, and again, nothing mainstream, nothing important, but was overhyped in the Chinese media so as to get people to stop talking about the more important part. There you go, another example here. Hubei charts path to a better future. NEV's green focus among central provinces' efforts to improve growth, advance high-quality development. Once again, Hubei is the province where Wuhan is located. And as you know from the pandemic project, Wuhan was in a terrible shape during the pandemic project. And having a discussion about what has happened in Wuhan would be pretty problematic for the CCP, so why not just discuss a little bit about the environment and some green shit, because that will prevent people from discussing the more realistic problems, such as the human rights abuses in Qinghai and Hubei provinces. As you can see, the green type of propaganda and AI type of propaganda are very useful to hide or to distract the attention from something else. And this could be another lesson from this whole season, as I'm going to keep showing examples throughout the next 10-12 episodes. Sometimes wasting people's time and diverting their attention is a value in and of itself in propaganda. And that can be done with true things as well. I mean, I'm pretty sure the whole restoration of that lake of the Qinghai province, pretty sure that's true. But again, there are things of bigger interest there. But the newspaper is very busy to talk about the least important part of the province and talk as little as possible, preferably not at all, about the more important part. All right, I'll stop here for now. Thanks for watching. See you around. Don't forget to subscribe. Cheers.